What's up, YouTube? Max here. In response to my first video, I had a couple of requests. One of which was to talk specifically about cutting frozen wood and different things that you need to do to prepare to cut in the cold. Another thing was, hey, it's great that you have those monster pro saws, but can we see some more realistic, like homeowner type saws? So here's a homeowner type saw, and yeah, we're gonna cover some of that stuff. So first and foremost, bar oil is thick, and in the cold, I'd say anything below even 40 degrees, but especially below freezing, it gets so thick that it doesn't want to flow properly into the bar and into the chain by association. So many companies make a winter bar oil that is a little thinner and a little bit more likely to flow properly in that cold weather. This stuff comes from Steel. It's just what I have available to me locally. It works great. I'm not saying that I'm a Steel shill. I'm not saying that I hate Steel. I just know that it's what I've got available to me, and it works great. So we're going to use that. My fuel mix doesn't change at all, but what can change, depending on the saw and just how cold it is we might have to tweak the carburetor ever so slightly. And if we do, we'll cover that too. So I'm just going to top this thing off, and then we'll get to a tree and kind of go from there. All right, so winter cutting, you got to let the saw warm up. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the summer, you got to let the saw warm up. Otherwise, you're inviting injury to your saw. You got to get the metals warm. They're designed to run warm. Okay, so the oil that's mixed into the gas needs to flow, get into the bearings, get into the cylinder walls, and protect everything. But especially when it's cold, you need to warm up the saw. I have no idea how well this thing is going to run in the winter. I don't think that I've ever run this saw in the winter, so we'll just see. But I'm going to get it started, and I'm not going to record the whole warm-up process, but I usually let them warm up in the winter for at least a good 4 or 5 minutes. But you'll be able to tell when you've got like proper throttle response. So let's see how it starts. Saw is pretty well warmed up. So now we got to talk about the tree we're going to fall. This guy right here. It's another cottonwood, and the first thing you need to do when you decide to fall a tree is assess the tree. First of all, assess the lean. It is going to be extremely hard to see on camera, but basically the way that I like to do it is get around the base of the tree and look up and even walk around the tree. And that way you'll have a really good idea of which way it's leaning. And I can tell you right now that this tree is leaning that way. Okay? Now, also look at any large limbs or weight that might be on the tree. This tree has little itty bitty limbs, so I'm not really worried about those. But if you do have some big limbs or big leaders coming off of it, factor that in too, because it might be leaning one way a little bit, but if it's got a bunch of weight on the other side, that changes the equation a little bit. Okay, so assess the tree. Then assess your work area. I've got this in my way. I'm gonna get rid of it. I got this little guy in my way. I'm gonna get rid of it. I think this guy can stay for now, but I want to clean up my work area so I'm not tripping over anything. And also I want to make some exits, right? So that if something goes wrong, I have a couple of different options as far as how to get away from this tree. So my general idea is that I create a window behind me, behind the direction that I'm going to fall, and I can go 45 degrees off to one direction or 45 degrees off to the other direction. And that's just a rule of thumb. So I'm going to start doing my cleanup real quick, make sure I got my exits, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we've assessed our lane, we've cleaned up our work area a little bit. I've got nice avenues to exit. I've got a couple of bigger trees over here to hide behind if anything goes really wrong. Now we're gonna make our first cut. And it is by far the most important cut. The first cut is your aiming cut, basically. And this is a general rule of thumb, but I'm gonna cut in level with the ground, basically, and I'm gonna try and go in about a third of the width of the tree. And that is, again, a general rule of thumb. Different things can change that. But about a third of the width of the tree, and perpendicular to my lay, my direction that I want to follow the tree in. So it should be basically 90 degrees from where I want to follow the tree. And we'll show that up close. Now most saws are going to have some sort of gunning sights. Now if you come over this side, you can see that even on this, homeowner saw, we have this nice line that goes all the way down this side of the saw. That's your gunning sight. So if you look down that, when you've got the saw right up in the cut, it will tell you what direction it should fall. And I'm trying to just kind of leave it in the open. I want to be able to cut it up. That's the idea. We don't have any real targets here. This is a great practice playground. So that is my aiming cut right there. Now what I'm going to try and do is match up to it. I do what they call a Humboldt, which means that I come at an angle from underneath. That's an old school technique. That's just the way I learned. We'll cover that in a different video probably, but let's see if I can match it up. And it is much better to cut it short on your matchup than to go too deep, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit further too. Now, of course I nailed it. What I meant by that was that if I were to cut at a shorter angle and end up back here with my undercut, that would change the angle that the tree is gonna fall at, basically, because I'd have to meet it back up. So if I end up cutting up here, I can clean that up. I can go back in there, but you don't want to alter this initial cut. That's the idea. This one, I'm going to clean this up a little bit because the angle is slightly off, but really this is good. This is good enough. I'm just a little bit of a perfectionist, so give me a minute here and I'll get set up and we'll clean this up slightly and then we'll work on the back cut. Okay, now it's beautiful. We've got a little bit of a gap in here that helps with the hinging process, and it's mostly flush, so these two surfaces can meet up and not throw the tree to one side or another. So now we'll start the back cut, and every species of tree and every cutting situation is a little bit different. They say the general rule of thumb is, 30% of the tree for your undercut, and then roughly 10% of your diameter for your hinge. Now, I know that this is cottonwood and it is softwood, so I usually leave a little bit more for my hinge. And the hinge is the part that keeps the tree from going completely sideways and wonky. So you got to make sure that you don't cut off one side of your hinge or the other, your corners, because then the tree just completely loses all control. So I'm gonna go in fairly slow on the back cut and just keep checking it. So there, I wasn't happy with the angle that I was coming in at. I want to be either basically right at the same level as my undercut, or even slightly above. Again, it's different with different species and stuff, but that's the way I like to do it. So this is close enough for me. Again, I'm not a professional, but just giving some tips to some friends. Now you'll see as I'm cutting, I know that this tree is leaning that way, so I'm not really worried about it coming back and pinching the bar. But out of habit, I move the bar back and forth, because if you do that while you're cutting, if it starts to sit back on your saw, you will feel it before it becomes a real issue. So that's just something I do out of habit. But let's go a little further and see what happens. It's still lower than I wanted to be, but that's okay. Ready?
Yep.
Helps if it's on. Always look up. You can see what the tree is doing. It's already starting to go. I could probably just wait and let it go. But I like to get hear that big crash. So that's what I'm gonna do, but I gotta come over here and check and make sure. I've still got a lot of wood there, not as much on this side, so I'm gonna change that a little bit. Get behind it. Beautiful. So part of this video is just to prove that you can do a lot with a little saw. This is 51 cc's, and this is a great 51 cc saw, but it is not a big saw, and you can do a lot with it. You really can. I'm gonna buck a little bit of this tree. I'm usually a long bar guy because I don't like to bend over. We'll cover that more and more and more, but you absolutely can cut a tree this size with a relatively small saw, no problem. This tree, because of the way that it is sitting right now, I'm going to relieve some pressure. Okay, so the rule is compression first and then tension. So what I mean by that is, because of the way this tree is leaning or laying right now, all of this top strap of the tree is under compression. Okay, it's when I start to cut into it, the two pieces of wood are going to be pushing into each other and eventually pinching the bar. So I'll relieve a little bit of that compression, and then I'll come underneath and cut it the rest of the way through, and that will keep from pinching the bar, it'll keep from damaging the bar, and it'll just keep your workflow smooth. So let's do that real quick. Perfect. Now we're in a much better place. Both sides of the log are under much less strain, but specifically right here, there is a couple of pieces of firewood that I can cut off here, and they're just going to fall to the ground. I don't have to do any fancy cuts or anything, and that's where planning ahead a little bit can save you energy, save wear and tear on your equipment, and save you time. So I'm gonna just do a couple of quick bucks here. And again, this is a 51 cc saw, 50.4 actually. Good chain on it, and it cuts. Right there, it started to pinch. Started to pinch my bar. So I just immediately revved it up, pulled the saw out, and now I'm gonna go from the underside. There's a little bit of air underneath right here. The log is completely supported on this piece of wood right here. So it's gonna pinch, and I don't want it to pinch. So this is how you avoid that. See how I'm bent over here? Even though I'm on sort of a hill, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2" when I stand up straight, and it's uncomfortable for me. Even with this light saw, I'm bent over all the time, and it gets uncomfortable. I got lower back problems anyway. I don't need more. So I'm gonna go grab my Husqvarna 372. It has a 32-inch bar on it right now, and we'll see the difference. Okay, same log, same tree, much bigger saw. Now we're at 70.7 cc's, and it's a pro saw, really. It's got the full wrap handle, which is super helpful. As you saw, I didn't have to, but it made it a lot easier following that tree to step to the other side because I had the handle. This one, you can really do different kinds of work with. 32-inch bar, full complement chain. We'll cover that at a different time. But this just makes it easier for a tall guy like me, but anybody really, to not hurt yourself is the basics. For one thing, you know, you can reach more with the long bar. You can stand up straight, stand up and buck. But also, the long bar gives the saw less leverage in the event of a kickback. So it is much less likely for you to have a kickback and actually hurt yourself. But that's a different story. So I'm literally gonna use the same cut that I just started with the smaller saw. Yes, I've already warmed this saw up, and I'm just gonna see how my body positioning is different. Okay, so one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that we've learned something recently. I've learned something recently, actually, on this property right here. And that is that with cottonwood, or what we call cottonwood specifically, they hold on to the hinge much better when they're frozen. Now, what I mean by that is, you know, you can see these fibers right here. This is part of the hinge. This whole, all the way across, is the hinge. Okay? And normally with cottonwood, it's a very, very soft wood, and it has short fibers, so it does not hold on very well. So you have to leave more of a hinge, and you really can't overcome much of a lean. But we've seen over the last week or so, cutting cottonwoods out here in the snow and the ice and frozen wood, that they do hold on much better to the hinge. And that is, I'm sure, going to be very different with different kinds of trees, different species. But I imagine that soft wood that holds a lot of moisture, that's pretty much going to be the case. So down there in Hope, those big hemlocks that hold a lot of moisture, I bet they're the same way. I don't know about the birch yet. We'll find out soon. Anyway, that's probably it for today. We'll see you next time. Hopefully we're going to talk about chains.